Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the University Honors College lecture series. This semester, we're focusing on the topic of letters, and my name is Dr. Philip Phillips, and I'm the Associate Dean of the University Honors College. I'm pleased to welcome all of you here. I'm pleased that we have a very full room of students. I know that the class is enrolled to capacity, and it seems that we have a number of visitors here today. So if you're not in this class, welcome. If you are in the class, welcome. Glad to have all of you here. This is, in fact, a course that is required for students who are graduating from the Honors College, but it's also a series that's free and open to the public. So we always encourage people to come. We have posters all around campus and all over the building so you can see what the topics are. And if something's interesting to you or you think your roommate might be interested in the topic, then, bring your roommate along. We're always glad to have more people here. Now, today is the first day of the lecture series, and I wanted to give you, just wanted to say something about the origins of the series. So, our speaker today actually was the inspiration for the series. Kent Syler and I were sitting together at a gubernatorial forum back in the fall, and we got onto the topic of teaching, and he started to tell me something very interesting that he had been doing in his classes, and that is sharing constituent correspondence from the Albert Gore Senior Center. Correspondence that was written during the period of the civil rights era. And it was a fascinating exercise and a fascinating opportunity to read handwritten letters from people at the time, people here writing about current events that could bring people back into the past. And also, in the process of going back in the past and thinking about those issues that were prevalent at the time, thinking very much about the present. So that's one of the ways in which letters can be powerful, ways in which letters can leave a deep impression on us. And so I left our conversation with that deep impression, thinking this is going to be the subject of the next lecture series. Something having to do with letters, something having to do with correspondence, from a multitude of perspectives from different disciplines. The course also is an MT Engage course, and many of you have taken MT Engage courses as part of your studies. Usually an MT Engage course will include at least one beyond the classroom activity. And so it was natural that we would choose the Gore Center on our very own campus to be the destination for our Beyond the Classroom experience. So you'll note that our first two speakers are from the Gore Center, and then our next class period will be devoted to a field trip. So instead of coming here, we will meet in the Gore Center across campus. So I'm really happy to have all of you in the class. I'm really excited about all the speakers, the topics that they'll be covering, everything from history and English to physics and astronomy, rhetoric, digital correspondence. It's a really, really nice selection of topics. Okay, so at this time I'd like to invite Dr. John Weil, who's the Dean of the Honors College, to introduce our speaker.
So our speaker, as you've already heard, is Kent Syler. He's been deeply involved in Tennessee politics for over 30 years. Began as a sound truck driver in 1978. Since become one of Tennessee's most respected political strategists and analysts. He's taught at MTSU in the Department of Political Science since I hired him back in 2002. I was in chair of that department. He's also serves now as a special projects coordinator at MTSU's Albert Gore Research Center. He managed Congressman Bart Gordon's first campaign for Congress in 1984 and several other re-elections, served as Gordon's chief of staff from 1985 to 2011, and worked on a lot of other campaigns as well. He serves most Springs, I guess it is. I'm always a little envious. He goes over with Bart Gordon to France and lectures at the Paris Institute of Political Studies, which sounds pretty cool, talking about American government. He's a frequently quoted columnist and often cited by the national news media. Now, I think this is what before it was called the failing New York Times, but his work introducing students to archival constituent letters sent to Albert Gore was featured in the New York Times. He also serves regularly as a political analyst for WSMV-TV in Nashville. For those of you who are aspiring to political life, Bart started out here as a student body president and has both his bachelor and master's degree from here. He's very active in community service, and his service includes being chairman of the Murfreesboro Greenway Committee and past president of the Murfreesboro Rotary Club. Let's welcome him.
Thank you very much, John. I sure appreciate that. And it's really a good example of how sometimes your life takes unexpected turns. I was working for Congressman Gordon in 2002, and John says, "Why don't you come over here and teach our campaign management class?" And I'd never thought of teaching in my life. And I said, you know, I guess we always say never say no to an opportunity. So I said, yeah, I'll do that. And I had just finished my master's here, and so I came over and I did that one time a year, the campaign management class, until 2010, and really enjoyed it. And I'd been in the congressional office with Congressman Gordon for 26 years. And he decided to retire in 2010, early 2011, so I had to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I thought, you know, I like teaching. And so I was able to come over and talk them into letting me do this full time in 2011, and I've loved it. I spend part of my time teaching, and then I spend the other part of my time in the Albert Gore Research Center. So it's been a good match. And I want to thank you, Philip, for inviting me and for taking off with this idea. Susan Lyons, thank you so much for doing all the hard work to put this together. And Louis Kariakoutis, the director of the Albert Gore Research Center and one of my many bosses here, is here today too. So what I want to talk about is letters, or our letters, I guess I should say. But I want to talk about letters that really opened my eyes to a lot of the problems, a lot of the issues that we face today. Everyone would admit we're very divided, right? Politically. Incredibly divided. And these letters, today's lecture, the title is something I took from the New York Times. They put the label on this, and I thought it was very good, because that's when I started looking at these old letters, I started to figure out, wow, I've heard this stuff before. And this isn't new. These issues that divide us today are by and large issues we've been dealing with for 50, 60, maybe since the beginning of the Republic. And so I kind of looked for a common theme. What makes people, what causes distress? What makes people disagree? And one thing that kept coming to the forefront was change. We as human beings really don't deal very well with change. And a little bit more, I mentioned I worked with Bart Gordon for 26 years, and one of the things that we found out very early when we, got elected, got to the congressional office, is in Washington, the mail doesn't just come once a day. The mail comes 3-4 times a day. So correspondence is something you deal with on a frequent basis, almost, every hour of the day. And communication is so important to a congressional office. We have a representative democracy. We elect people to represent us. We don't have direct democracy, right? We elect people that vote for us. And so corresponding with people was with us a huge part of what we did, and it's a huge part of what modern congressional offices do. So back to the change. This was 2 weeks ago. This was in the Washington Post. Look at that. The defining clash of our time is between people who believe change is coming too slowly and those who believe change is happening too quickly. The Too Fast coalition is full of folks who feel like strangers in their own land. People tend to blame globalization, immigration, and political correctness for their problems. They turn to nativism, protectionism, and isolation. The Too Slow coalition is angry about the failure to address climate change, income inequality, mass shootings. Many in this category have lost faith in capitalism and see socialism as appealing. Pretty good description of where we are politically today, right? So, I know this is about letters, but I'm going to start you off with a little bit of a few commercials from our last presidential race. And I want you to look at them, and then we're going to talk a little bit. I want you to tell me which candidate is addressing the change coming too slow group, and which candidate is addressing the change not coming, who's addressing coming too fast, who's addressing changes too slow, okay?
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
The politicians can pretend it's something else, but Donald Trump calls it radical Islamic terrorism. That's why he's calling for a temporary shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until we can figure out what's going on. He'll quickly cut the head off ISIS and take their oil. And he'll stop illegal immigration by building a wall on our southern border that Mexico will pay for.
We will make America great again.
In Hillary Clinton's America, the middle class gets crushed. Spending goes up. Taxes go up. Hundreds of thousands of jobs disappear. It's more of the same, but worse. In Donald Trump's America, working families get tax relief. Millions of new jobs created. Wages go up. Small businesses thrive. The American dream achievable. Change that makes America great again. Donald Trump for president.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
The American moment is here. Two choices, two Americas, decided by you. Hillary Clinton will keep us on the road to stagnation. Fewer jobs, rising crime, America diminished at home and abroad. Donald Trump will bring the change we're waiting for. America, better, stronger, more prosperous for everyone. A plan for tomorrow, a future brighter than our past. The choice is yours.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
This is when Hillary Clinton kind of handed Donald Trump a gift. When you've got a group that thinks change is happening too fast, and then you categorize them in a negative way, Trump kind of took it and ran with it here.
Speaking to wealthy donors, Hillary Clinton called tens of millions of Americans deplorable.
You could put half of Trump's supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
People like you, and you. Deplorable. You know what's deplorable? Hillary Clinton viciously demonizing hard-working people like you.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
So I know we just finished the most expensive governor's race and Senate race in Tennessee history, and most of that money was spent on ads. So I know all of last year you got all the political ads you could probably ever want to see. So forgive me for showing you a few more. But who was that addressing? Who were they trying to? Which group of people? The too slow change people or the too fast change people? Yeah. The too fast change people, right? Things are changing too quickly. And as I said before, we don't really accept change very well. It makes us nervous. It's kind of, we're wired to some extent biologically to kind of avoid change. Because if we are trying to survive like our ancestors, was change necessarily a good thing if you changed the way you did something over and over and over again? A lot of times it wasn't. It was risky. And I did my thesis here at MTSU on this subject in the 90s. There was an Italian sociologist named Valfredo Pareto. And Pareto had two groups of people. he first contended that we had conservative sentiments overall, that we were biologically somewhat conservative and tried to avoid change. But he said there are two groups in society. There are the foxes, who are kind of change-oriented and always pushing change, and there are the lions that kind of champion the conservative sentiments. And he said you go through these cycles, that the lions would keep society very stable and things would not progress, they would not change. But then the foxes then would come and they would convince people to change. But the foxes would always go too far, and the lions would take their heads off. And so when I originally did this thesis, I was comparing Bill Clinton, the fox, did the 1994 election that was a big Republican landslide, and I did Newt Gingrich as the lion. But if you go to where we are today, and if you look at Donald Trump's hair, he is a great lion, right? I mean, Barack Obama's elected. Things probably move too far too fast for a lot of people. There's a lot of change going on. You turn back to someone who's going to make America great again, bring things back. So it's kind of that 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I just keep seeing this as I continue to watch it in politics. So let's look at Hillary Clinton ads.
I'm Hillary Clinton, and I approve this message.
Her church taught her to do all the good you can, for all the people you can, for as long as you can. After law school, she could have joined a high-priced law firm, but instead, she worked to reform juvenile justice in South Carolina, exposed racism in Alabama schools, registered Latino voters in Texas, and provided legal aid to families in Arkansas. Her life's work has been about breaking barriers, and so would her presidency. Which is why for every American who's not being paid what they're worth, who's held back by student debt or a system tilted against them, and there are far too many of you, she understands that our country can't reach its potential unless we all do. Together, a stronger country.
He says we should punish women who have abortions.
There has to be some form of punishment.
That Mexicans who come to America are rapists.
They're rapists.
And that we should ban Muslims from coming here at all.
Total and complete shutdown.
Donald Trump says we can solve America's problems by turning against each other. It's wrong, and it goes against everything New York and America stand for.
With so much at stake, she's the one tough enough to stop Trump. Hillary Clinton.
I'm Hillary Clinton, and I approve this message.
Who's she speaking to? Yeah, change too slow, right? People who are dissatisfied and want to get things moving more quickly. When you look at it, it's such an obvious conflict of where the issue lines are drawn. So back to letters. The Albert Gore Research Center, I'll tell you a little bit about that first. Albert Gore Sr. was a graduate of MTSU. He served in the House of Representatives from 1938 until 1952, and from 52 to 1970, he served in the United States Senate. When he lost his re-election bid in 1970, he bagged all of his letters and all of his papers up and sent them to MTSU. And that is what began the Albert Gore Research Center. When Congressman Gordon retired, after his 26 years, we sent all of our stuff to the Albert Gore Research Center. And we have, Richard Fulton, Clifford Allen, Jim Cooper, a bunch. So we've collected papers now for a long time. It also serves as the university's archives. So all the MTSU history goes there. So there's I did this shot just to kind of show how correspondence has changed to some extent. And when I show my American government students some of these, it's, how many of you know what the Western Union telegram is? Yeah, what's a telegram? It's that's 1960s email there. So if you got so excited about the Civil Rights Bill that you just wanted to tell Senator Gore that day or the next day, you had to call Western Union, pay some money, they would send it up, and someone would deliver it to the congressional office. Yeah, that was an email. You'll see that we've got letters there. You'll see we have postcards. One of the things I always found interesting on the postcards, most of these postcards on the Civil Rights Bill are from people who are very opposed to it. Some of them are, frankly, very racist letters. And it always made it, the postcard always found it ironic. See who the stamp is on the postcard? They were pre-stamped. It's Abraham Lincoln. So we're getting a Lincoln, yeah. It's kind of interesting. Those were pre-stamped. There was a Lincoln stamp. And I had someone tell me once that his mother was so still 100 plus years later, still disliked Lincoln so badly that she and her friends had to use the Lincoln stamps because that's all there was to mail the letters, but in protest they would turn them upside down. But you see on the left, we have letters, we have postcards, and then you see on the right, what we have are, this is from jumping to Congressman Gordon's collection. These are from, 1996. We start getting emails. So when we first came into office in 1984, there was no email. But as things moved, we moved from all letters and postcards, still a lot of letters and postcards, but a lot of emails also. And you see there we were printing them out to respond to them. You'll see the numbers on all of these things. You'll see more of it on the Gore correspondence, and you see the numbers and the marks through it. That means that we responded to the letter. So those let staffers know that, hey, we've dealt with this letter. The thing that really, as Dr. Phillips said, got me involved with the letters was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. When I was teaching Introduction to American Politics, and we did the chapter on civil rights, I would bring my students over, and I would give them an entire file folder. Several of my past students are in here. But I would give everybody a file folder of letters from 1964 and say, okay, you're a Senate aide today, and it's 1964, and you're to tell Senator Gore how he should vote on the Civil Rights Act. Here's the mail, because that's what we do in congressional office. Here's the mail. And they would start through it. And when you go through it, you find that probably 80% of the people are against it. And that's ultimately how Albert Gore Sr. voted. But then we get into, well, should you do as a member of Congress what's right, what you think is right, or should you do what your constituents ask you to do? So it always opened it up for a lot of good discussions on that. But as my students would read these letters, and I'll show you a little bit more about it here in a minute, as they would read these letters about why people were against the Civil Rights Act, kind of a bell went off with me. We had just gone through the Affordable Care Act. And if you took in the people who were arguing that we need smaller, and again, it's a rational argument, and it's a thing that educated people can debate on. What should be the role of government in our lives? So the small government arguments against and they oftentimes would say so-called Civil Rights Act, were virtually the same as the arguments against the so-called Affordable Care Act. You could take out Civil Rights Act and put in Affordable Care Act, and it was the same letter 50 years later. So I started looking then at other things, and I'll show you a few of these letters. So I'm not going to, I know it's, how many of you have trouble reading cursive? I found that with my students these days too. It's kind of a whole new language for some, but this woman, I'm terribly alarmed. This country is, in the way this country is moving, change. I believe that if the, quote, so-called Civil Rights Bill is passed by the Senate It is the beginning of the end of this great country. Pretty high stakes, right? One of the other things that the Civil Rights Act did was Title VII addressed discrimination not only on race, but on gender. So it stopped companies from not hiring people simply because they were women. And so we have a lot of, it's amazing, we have a lot of letters on business letterhead. Some of the businesses are still around today and would not want to see those letters, but we have a lot like that. But look at this, the second paragraph. I still think that in this great country of ours, I should at least have choice to choose my friends, my customers, my employees, and down the line. If a minority has a right to call for the way things spelled out in this ridiculous bill, then maybe the majority which should rule has some rights also. Something you find with the Civil Rights Act and when you talk about liberty, many of the letters kind of, the people who wrote them think that liberty is kind of like a limited pie. That if you are giving someone else rights, that in some way your rights are being diminished. And we saw some of the similar stuff with the Affordable Care Act, is I've got insurance, and if you're giving people who don't have insurance, then I know it must be going to negatively affect my insurance and my access some way. But this limited pie concept of if they get rights, then it makes me lose rights is kind of a theme that you see over and over again. The other thing that is very familiar is in the Affordable Care Act letters, everyone talked about this is just going to socialism. This is socialism, socialism, socialism. In many of the civil rights letters, and it kind of shows how our enemies changed a little bit. I grew up in the 60s in school and spent a lot of time under my desk preparing for Soviet nuclear attacks, like that's going to help. But so you see a lot of things about communism in these 60s letters and you can see that second paragraph. In my judgment, it is communist as Fidel Castro himself. So you see a lot of times too, Martin Luther King is not looked at well in these letters. Many people call him a tool of the communists, someone who is making life tougher, from dividing America, and that the Soviets are back there laughing at us over all the trouble Martin Luther King is causing. And they talk a lot too about riots and things of that nature. Petitions, one of the other things that we would get then and get a lot of now. Okay, that brings us to this. So I got to looking at more and more of the letters and more issues. When Colin Kaepernick was demonstrating, everyone knows the fury that went on there, right? The protest. Protest is never pretty and is never popular. So I remembered those civil rights letters at how people disliked Martin Luther King and the protests that he was leading. And so I started looking at more of the letters about the protests of the 60s and how people didn't react. A lot of people didn't react well. It was very uncomfortable for a lot of people. Just like Colin Kaepernick and the kneeling was uncomfortable for a lot of people now. So this then led me to look at several other things. So I get a call one day from a New York Times reporter named Campbell Robertson. And Campbell was coming down here to cover the white supremacy march that was scheduled for fall of 2017. And I'd worked with the Times reporter before, and he had told Campbell to call me and just see kind of what the lay of the land was and get some background. So we talked about that issue, and then Campbell stayed here a couple of days, and then he kind of decided that this white supremacy rally might not be as big a story as his editors thought it would be. So I said, well, you know, I've been working on something with letters. Why don't you come to the Gore Center? And so he came to the Gore Center. Lewis helped us. Donna Baker, an archivist with us, and Sarah Calise, another archivist. We all started pulling letters. And what we showed him what we had found, that history to some extent was just repeating itself on many issues. So I'm just going to read you a couple of things here. Look at this first paragraph here. Things have really changed, one man lamented in a letter from Crossville. There are protests and riots in the cities, he said. The government is telling businesses whom they must serve and intruding into health care. There is an open door to large numbers of new immigrants. People are trying to regulate the guns of law-abiding citizens, and the forgotten man who earns an honest living has been abandoned. Sound familiar? And then another letter writer said, long-suffering put upon silent, unorganized white majority. Time, as another one wrote, to, quote, America first above all things. So, you know, we talked about a lot about how, you know, how these things, as I said, just keep repeating themselves. And so the Times did a great job here of pulling out a few letters, and I'm going to share the place they pulled out with them on really a wide variety of issues. Civil rights. When our nation gets to the point where it can tell the individual who he should hire, who he should serve, and whom he is to associate with, he actually doesn't have a business anymore. Again, kind of one group getting rights is taking it from another. A pro-Civil Rights Act letter in light of our Christian beliefs and traditional American value system and the effect it has on our image abroad, second-class citizenship is no longer seems defensible. The Civil Rights Bill was passed. Did that satisfy them? No. And the next bill won't, nor the next. All you hear from this group is discrimination, but the word has more than one meaning. The passing of that bill alone has torn the USA apart. Surely there's a man somewhere with enough guts to stand up for our Constitution and our form of government. Healthcare, we've been arguing, healthcare is going to be probably the single most important issue in the next presidential election. If you look at the midterms, we were back on health care again. This is, 1960s, and we've started Medicare. Medicare had problems getting going. Once the precedent is set under the Social Security program, it is not unreasonable to expect a progressive extension until all segments of the public are covered and the federal government is the sole purchaser of health care. And right now, Medicare for all, have you heard that term? So pretty good predictor of some of the future there. I wonder if you realize that you are helping to bring the full-scale socialized medicine in the United States. Is this the kind of United States you are helping create? The kind of United States you want your children to grow up in? And again, this is over Medicare. If you ask seniors today to give up their Medicare, you would have a total revolution. So, sometimes the anti-change group can be very wrong. Immigration. Regardless of circumstances, we have allowed too many foreigners to enter this country. The future of the United States may hinge on this very thing. Many of our leaders in Washington have lost sight of the fact that they were elected to serve the interests of the American people and not some foreign-born minority group. Again, I sincerely urge you, do not be misled by the bleeding hearts. A political refugee and a displaced person has no place in America. It is high time the U.S. considers selling our form of government to our own people, not by flowery words and phrases, but by actions such as America first above all things. Why not close all immigration until we can handle or at least control the thug element, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Chicago, etc., in our own country? MS-13, right? I can't help believe that more immigrants will but add to the problem, and at the same time swell our welfare rolls. Don't know your stand on this matter, but trust it will be in the interest of the ordinary citizen who works and pays taxes and is tired of seeing his tax money squandered on dreamy-eyed ideas about helping the underprivileged. of some other country every time one comes along, when it seems we've got our hands full here at home. Riots. These are labeled as radical racial disturbances. I am convinced that they are planned and staged by a relatively small percentage of the Negro population, who, along with the communists and fellow travelers, are the ones who have been making an issue of police brutality. Police were under attack here a lot too and being defended. I might suggest that before monies are appropriated to investigate reasons why riots occur, that thought be given to aiding city police with additional funds, also a campaign to honor and uphold the policeman rather than the absurdity of crying police brutality while riots run rampant through our nation. Gun control. Sure, the Constitution gives the right to bear firearms, but can't the Constitution be amended? When I heard that 18,000 Americans were killed with guns last year, I was absolutely shocked, especially when these figures are compared with countries with strong gun control laws like France and England. That was a minority position. If in fact, if it is a fact and history has proved that you cannot legislate the morality of an individual, the misuse and mishandling of all firearms by a minority of irresponsible persons has brought this issue to the present situation. Remember 1968 was a very bloody year. Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, unheard voices. The 1968 forgotten man is not often in the news unless he has mugged or on his way home, has been mugged on his way home from work. The TV cameramen don't follow him around. The news commentators don't hang on his every word, but he is the guy who will pay the taxes to provide the guaranteed annual income for those who won't work, to rebuild college buildings vandalized or burned down by students and non-students permitted on college campuses. So you get the idea, right? Well, I'll tell this story very quickly, then I want to leave some time for questions. When the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination, I was looking back at our letters and that came in right after he was assassinated. What were people thinking? And amazingly, the letters, the subject of the letters we got the most of where President Lyndon Johnson had ordered flags flown at half-staff in honor of Dr. King. That upset many people. And so the people were writing to Senator Gore and to, this is former Congressman Richard Fulton of Nashville, complaining that, that Martin Luther King didn't deserve this honor. Well, I was going through Fulton's things, and I happened to find this letter from a guy named Rife Huey. And if you look in 1968, he's from Nashville, but he was a student at the University of North Carolina. So I did the math, and I thought, this guy'd be about 68. He might still be alive, and that's really an odd name. So I started Googling. So I started looking, and eventually, I find a MySpace account that was obviously very old that had him linked to a woman named Jackie Schrago. And I know who Jackie Schrago is, and I know how to find her. So I called Jackie Schrago once I found her, and I told her what I was doing, and she gave me his cell number. So you can see he's a pro-civil rights individual. So I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we could run this guy down and talk to him about how 1968 impacted his life? So I texted him and took a picture of his letter. You can see, hi, told him who I was, and said, I'd like to talk to you about your letter from 50 years ago. Can you imagine? And you can see it, but sure, Kent, how's tomorrow? So we talked with him, and he talked to us about how incredibly impactful Louis Kiriakoutis and Donna Baker and I got him on the phone. He talked about how the events of 1968 impacted his life still today. The assassination of King, the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, And he said he couldn't really remember sitting down and writing that letter, but he did remember how upset he was and how he felt powerless to do anything, and that this was a way he was sure that at least he could do something. So, bottom line on all of this is there's an amazing resource in the Albert Gore Research Center. And a lot of times you hear people say, it's never been this bad. We've never had to deal with things like that. It's just not true. The history gives you a great foundation, a great benchmark to understand that by and large, we're not dealing with a lot of new things. It also lets you know that change happens very, very slowly. Just think about these 1964 civil rights letters were 100 years after the Civil War in 1964. They were 100 years we'd been dealing with those issues. And now here we are 50 plus years later, and we're still dealing with a lot of the same issues. It's, change is slow. So I'm happy to answer questions. I believe we've got about 10 minutes left. So questions? Yeah.
So I saw that you had emails from the congressman that you were on his campaign. How do you see the research center, I guess, collecting more, and how open are current representatives or anybody to handing over piles of emails to you guys?
Well, we handed over our emails, and that's something that archivist, which I'm not, but we're working a lot now, and the Gore Center was one of the people one of the centers in the forefront, because correspondence had so changed from pen and paper to a lot of electronic stuff. So we sent all of our paper and we sent all of our electronic records, and we treat them just like we would something on paper. Now, as far as how open are members of Congress about sending things for research, Congress has a rule that a congressperson's papers are their own property. So if they want to destroy all of their records, they can destroy them. If they want to donate them, they can donate them. We felt that we wanted our stuff available for researchers. Now, we do work to protect people's identity. A lot of this Gore stuff is over 50 years old, and generally we assume that most of these people are no longer with us. Congressman Gordon has opened his legislative files for, if you wrote us on the last day he was in office in 2010 and you wrote us about an issue, that's open to the public. Another thing that congressional offices deal a lot with are what we call casework. People who need help. Many times it's people needing medical care things, and so I've had people send us their entire medical history. Obviously, we don't release that, and when we do, it would be released in a redacted sort of way. So we try to protect people's privacy, but at the same time, make as much available as we can. It's a good question. Yeah?
Have you seen a decrease, or have you expect to see a decrease in how much is donated to you in light of the last presidential election?
No, I think members of Congress are still pretty interested in donating things. Now, there's a paranoia. If you've been in office for a long time, you're accustomed to kind of being like hunting season. Everybody's looking at your stuff, looking for you to screw something up. And so that mentality makes you very defensive. What you learn is, after you quit, no one cares. Once you are no longer a political threat, you're kind of out of season. So especially political figures who don't anticipate running for more stuff are pretty open to giving it. If they expect to be doing something else, they're probably a little more cautious. It's just inbred. Yeah.
Since it appears like society treats all of our current issues, which you have shown us to be, ongoing issues, since they seem to
treat them as if they are new and we've never had to deal with them this way before. How do you think that it would change the particularly political discussion if people were more aware about the repetition here and that stuff hasn't really changed them?
Yeah, I love that question because it's a problem. Because, and here, how many of you want to be journalists? Yeah, as Dr. Weil said, I do Channel 4's political analysis, and I work with a lot of their reporters, and I've had a lot of journalism students I work with here too. And again, no fault of being young, it's a great thing, right guys? But, what's happened in media especially is there just aren't any older reporters anymore. And so you have a lot of very young people who have very limited life experience. And I think this is a way for not only young people, but all of us to develop some life experience and understand that, we're not the first people, by and large, that most things have ever happened to. And working in an archives teaches you that. And you can almost pick any issue and you can go find something in the archives. Something I would have done today if I'd had more time is I got into the 1998 stuff of everyone who wanted to impeach Bill Clinton. And the letters are very moralistic. They are, very, very, this guy has no morals, we need to impeach him. I thought what a great exercise it would be to call these people and see where they are on the Trump stuff, But the Democrats, if I'm a Democrat and I'm advising Democrats, you need to learn, you need to learn from the Republicans' mistake. They overstepped and they were punished by voters in the midterm election that followed. Usually the party of the president loses seats. Bill Clinton actually, the Democrats actually gained a few seats because the public viewed them as having overstepped. Democrats need to be very careful with all this Trump impeachment stuff, not to do the same thing, not to rush into something that will be punished later by voters. Yeah.
Was the swing from the midterm election, was that like a predictable thing though? Because didn't Reagan he lost just as many seats?
Yeah, midterms typically punish the party of the president. I mentioned 1994 when I did that, when I went back and did my thesis based on that. I was working for Congressman Gordon. We were, it was our kind of 10 years in Congress. We won 13 elections before it was over. That night, we won by 2,100 votes. It looked like we were going out the door. And I can still remember the only way we were going to win is if we did well in Rutherford County and some eastern counties on election day. And we were in the Garden, anyway, I guess it's the Garden Plaza or whatever, but a hotel here in Murfreesboro. And we had the radio on in the bathroom and blasting, because that's, I don't know why it was set up in the bathroom. But the Bellwood precinct came in. And we knew that's a good Democratic precinct. We knew if we were going to come back, we had to take that precinct pretty substantially. They give the total, and they say Steve Gill, 425 votes, Bart Gordon, 200. And we go, it's over. We're done. And then about 30 seconds later, he goes, no, we got that one backwards. Bart Gordon won. And it was like, God, we're alive again. We've got a heartbeat. So, but yes, the midterms usually punish the president's party. Got time for one more. Hannah? I'm good. Hannah's had about 3 classes with me. Yeah. All right, you've been great to talk with you. Appreciate your attention.